Kevin Garnett has been involved in two of the biggest NBA trades of the last 15 years. One back in 2013 when he was traded to the Brooklyn Nets in arguably the most lopsided trade in league history, which I've also done a trade rewind video on that you can check out, by the way. And the other back in 2007 when he was traded to the Boston Celtics in one of the few trades in NBA history that led directly to a championship the following season. And that is the trade that I want to go back and look at today. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, I'm continuing my NBA Trade Rewind series by looking back at the 2007 trade that sent Kevin Garnett from the Minnesota Timberwolves to the Boston Celtics. As part of this, I'll be looking at Garnett's time in Minnesota prior to the trade, why he was moved in 2007 and what other teams were trying to outbid the Celtics at the time, how the pieces involved in the deal helped each team post-trade, and lastly, how every single piece in the trade has bounced around the league over the last 13 years, and how their 2020 rosters are impacted by the 2007 Garnett trade. Which, spoiler alert by the way, gets pretty crazy when I start talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves side of things. So let's talk about Kevin Garnett's incredible career in Minnesota. He made every single All-Star game from 1997 to 2009 except for 1999, and that's only because there was no All-Star game that season because of the lockout. He also made the All-NBA team every single year from 1999 to 2005, and first or second team All-NBA every single year of that other than 1999. First team All-Defense every year from 2000 to 2005 as well, and he won the 2004 MVP while also placing second in voting in 2000 and 2003. Garnett was also a statistical machine in Minnesota, averaging 20 points and 10 rebounds per game every single season from 1998 to 2007. And there aren't very many players in NBA history that have averaged 20 and 10 for 9 consecutive seasons. That list only includes 6 other players in the modern era: Patrick Ewing, Moses Malone, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Shaquille O'Neal. And Garnett also became one of the best big man passers in the league during his time in Minnesota as well. If you go back to 2003, which is as far back as cleaning the glass goes, all the way through the 2007 season prior to Garnett being traded, he ranked in the 99th or 98th percentile in assist percentage at his position. But with all those other things said, now we're going to get to what I think is probably the most incredible Kevin Garnett statistic that I could come up with, and it relates to his durability and shows why he was maybe one of the most durable players in NBA history in his time in Minnesota. So if you go back to the beginning of the 1999 NBA season through the end of the 2007 season, Garnett played in 641 of a possible 656 regular season games. He only missed 15 games across 8 full seasons. But I'm not just going to stop there. Now let's look at how many possible minutes he could have played in that 8-year span. In a typical NBA season, assuming that there are no overtime games, it is possible to play a little bit over 3,900 minutes in a single regular season. So for 8 seasons, that's over 31,000 possible regular season minutes. In that time span, Kevin Garnett played over 25,000 minutes, or 80% of the possible regular season minutes over an 8-year span. However, unfortunately for Garnett, the team simply didn't have very much playoff success at all in his time in Minnesota. They lost in the first round every single year from 1996 to 2003, then made the conference finals in 2004, and it looked like things were looking up. And then the team didn't make the playoffs again until 2018. So at the time of the Celtics trade in the summer of 2007, KG hadn't been to the playoffs in 3 full seasons. And after that 2006-2007 season, a 32-win campaign with a supporting cast of Ricky Davis, Mark Blunt, Trenton Hassell, and Mike James, it was becoming clear that changes needed to be made in Minnesota. So now we get to the actual trade, and there's a lot of really interesting little details here that show how much of an arms race it really was to try and get Kevin Garnett back in 2007, and there were a lot more teams competing for him than you might actually remember. So initially, the Celtics and Timberwolves had agreed to a trade around the time of the 2007 NBA draft, but Garnett said that he didn't want to sign an extension with Boston and would have left as a free agent a year later, so the Celtics took the deal off the table. And in sharp contrast to most modern stars, Garnett was fiercely loyal to the Timberwolves despite the lack of playoff success, and never really fully pushed for a trade. And the other wrinkle to this was if Garnett was going to leave, he apparently preferred to go to Phoenix. ESPN reported in June that Garnett would prefer to play in a warm weather city on a team with championship potential if he was forced to relocate, and that he really wanted to play with one of his better friends in the league in Steve Nash. But interestingly, the Suns and the Celtics weren't the only teams trying to bring in Garnett back in 2007, but the LA Lakers also were. The Lakers side of this is probably the most in-depth of any of those teams. According to an article written by Howard Beck of Bleacher Report, the Lakers believe that they had a handshake deal in place with the Timberwolves owner Glenn Taylor back in 2007, with Phil Jackson being a big supporter of the move. And the trade package at the time revolved around Lamar Odom and Andrew Bynum, and the Wolves apparently backed out simply because they didn't want Kevin Garnett in the Western Conference. But interestingly, the Suns were even closer to landing Garnett when you're looking at the specifics of the trade. The trade would have primarily involved Shawn Marion going to the Celtics, the 5th pick in the draft that was later traded for Ray Allen going to the Timberwolves, and Garnett going to the Suns. But it appeared as though the entire time the Timberwolves valued the trade package that the Celtics were offering more than any other team, because once Garnett backed off on his unwillingness to sign an extension with Boston, the deal was back on and he was eventually traded, as I said, in the summer of 2007. And this was after the draft when the Celtics had traded the 5th pick for Ray Allen, which obviously made it easier for Garnett to go ahead and agree to a new deal with the team. So now we get to the trade. July 31st, 2007, the Minnesota Timberwolves receive Ryan Gomes, Gerald Green, Sebastian Telfair, Theo Ratliff, Al Jefferson, and 2 first-round picks, both of which landed in the 2009 draft, and one of which was originally the Timberwolves that they traded to the Celtics in exchange for Ricky Davis. Now let's look at what these pieces actually did for each of these teams. For the Timberwolves, Gomes was a nice, durable rotation player in Boston and did the same thing for the Timberwolves for 3 years. Green was an incredibly athletic 21-year-old coming off of a nice second season in Boston, but he was later traded to Houston from Minnesota and then waived just 29 games into the 2007-2008 season. Telfair was a similar story to Green. He was just 21 years old and was a rotation player in Boston, and he was a rotation player in Minnesota for 2.5 years and was then traded to the Clippers in 2009. Ratliff's value was mostly in his $11.6 million expiring contract, and he played just 10 games in Minnesota before being waived in 2008. However, Al Jefferson was the prize that the Timberwolves really coveted, as he was coming off of a breakout season in Boston at just 22 years old and looked like a future star. He averaged 20 and 10 across 3 seasons in Minnesota as one of the better young bigs in the league and was a great post scorer, but after just 61 wins in 3 seasons, he was traded to the Jazz in 2010. As for the first round picks, the first of them landed at number 6 overall in 2009 and became Johnny Flynn, who lasted just over 2 seasons in Minnesota, struggling with a hip injury after a promising rookie season, and was out of the league by 2012. The second of the first round picks landed at 28th overall and became Wayne Ellington, who was in the rotation for 3.5 seasons in Minnesota, but was traded to Memphis in 2012. For the Celtics, the impact of Garnett is pretty obvious. His statistical impact decreased a bit as a part of a new Big Three in Boston, and at getting over 30 years old, he simply wasn't as effective either, but he was a huge part of the team, and they won 66 games and the title in 2008, while also winning 62 games the year after and making the finals in 2010. Now we get to typically the craziest part of these NBA Trade Rewind videos, and that is the impact that all of these pieces now have on the 2020 rosters for these teams. But in this video, it's a bit different. This time it's called How the Minnesota Timberwolves Got Literally Nothing in Exchange for Kevin Garnett Back in 2007, explained in less than 3 minutes. Ryan Gomes was traded in 2010 along with Luke Babbitt to Portland for Martell Webster. Webster was then waived in 2012, meaning that Gomes has no impact on the Timberwolves in 2020. Gerald Green was traded in 2008 for Kirk Snyder and a 2010 second-round pick that became a player that never played in the NBA. Snyder played in 27 games for the Timberwolves to finish that season and then was out of the league, meaning that Green has no impact on the Timberwolves in 2020. Sebastian Telfair was traded in 2009 along with Mark Madsen and Craig Smith for Quentin Richardson. Richardson never played for Minnesota as he was traded a few months later in the summer of 2009 to Miami for Mark Blunt. Blunt never played for Minnesota, meaning Telfair has no impact on the Timberwolves in 2020. Theo Ratliff was waived in 2008, meaning that Ratliff also has no impact on the Timberwolves in 2020. Al Jefferson was traded in 2010 for Kosta Koufos, a 2011 first-round pick that became Domantas Motiejunas, and a 2012 first-round pick that became Terrence Jones. Koufos was involved in the 2011 Carmelo Anthony trade to the Knicks, going to Denver along with Corey Brewer going to the Knicks in exchange for a 2015 second-round pick that became Rashawn Holmes, Eddie Curry, Anthony Randolph, and cash. Holmes was later traded as a pick in 2011 for a player that never played in the NBA. Curry was waived in 2011, and Randolph left as a free agent in 2012. Motiejunas was traded along with Johnny Flynn in a 2012 second-round pick that became Will Barton for Brad Miller, Nikola Mirotic, Chandler Parsons, and a 2013 first-round pick that became Andre Roberson. Miller was traded in 2012 for a second-round pick that was never conveyed. Mirotic was traded in 2011 for Norris Cole, Malcolm Lee, and cash. Cole was traded in 2011 for Bojan Bogdanovic. Bogdanovic was traded in 2011 to the Nets for cash and a second-round pick that became Lorenzo Brown, who was later waived. Lee was traded in 2013 with Andre Roberson to the Warriors for cash and a second-round pick that became a player that never played in the NBA. Parsons was traded in 2011 for cash. Jones was traded in 2012 as a pick for Chase Budinger and a player that never played in the NBA. Budinger was traded in 2015 for this guy, who left as a free agent in 2016. And all of that means that Jefferson and Flynn have no impact on the Timberwolves in 2020. And lastly, Wayne Ellington was traded in 2012 for Dante Cunningham, who left as a free agent in 2014, meaning that Ellington has no impact on the Timberwolves in 2020. And all of that means that the Timberwolves have zero value on their 2020 roster from the Kevin Garnett trade back in 2007. And that might seem like a no-brainer, right? I mean, this is a 13-year-old trade. You wouldn't really expect it to have much of an impact on the Timberwolves 2020 roster. But when I look back at the Carmelo Anthony trade in a different trade rewind video, I showed how the large part of the Nuggets core that they have right now came from that original 2011 Carmelo Anthony trade, and every single piece that they got in the Garnett trade was gone by 2012 except for Chase Budinger and Dante Cunningham. These are the types of trades where you're trading away a superstar and it's supposed to set your team up for success for years, and the Timberwolves pretty much screwed up every single move afterwards with every single piece that they got in the Garnett trade. In terms of how this impacts the Celtics roster in 2020, I already did an entire trade rewind video on the Garnett and Pierce trade to the Nets back in 2013, so if you want to, you can check that out. So ultimately, the Kevin Garnett trade was simply a disaster for Minnesota. They got very little on-court value in the years following the trade, and the value to their 2020 roster is literally non-existent, while the Celtics got a championship, as well as future pieces that are now powering a team that looks to be one of the more up-and-coming rosters in the Eastern Conference here all the way in 2020. And it's pretty incredible to look back on a trade for a player that was so impactful in Minnesota and was one of the best players in the league for a decade, and see how little the Timberwolves really got as it relates to their 2020 roster. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.